Okay, just one more video here just to tie up basically the last lecture that we just went through. Essentially, I wanted to make sure you understand the differences between adverse selection and moral hazard, because that has been a challenge for students in the past. If you ever forget, okay, remember this. Adverse selection is about the type of people who choose to be involved. Okay, so for health insurance, adverse selection is about who decides to get health insurance. Moral hazard is always about how people change their behavior. So, for example, with health insurance, there's also moral hazard, because once you have health insurance, you live more risky, right? So, if you ever get confused, just remember moral hazard is about people changing, adverse selection is about who decides to get involved. So, I've given 3 examples up here, kind of that relates to us in this class. My goal as being one member of this transaction of students taking classes, my goal is for students to study as much as possible, because it makes me feel good when you guys study hard. It makes me feel like I'm doing a good job, right? And so let's think about how my goals are affected by each of these policies, okay? Policy number 1, a last-second section of my course is added to the fall semester. So right now I'm slated to teach 2 sections of macro in the fall, and they decided at the last second to add 1 more section of macroeconomics. Now, who is going to decide to take that class, do you think? Well, let's think about who tends to sign up very early. People who sign up very early for classes are usually those people that are motivated, responsible. They're also stable in the sense that they already know what classes they need, okay? On the contrary, think about the types of students that are going to sign up for this class last second. It's probably the unmotivated, transfer students, students that just failed the class in the past. So the problem here is you're going to get adverse selection. But there's no moral hazard, right? I'm going to get students taking this class that are below average, but the class itself won't change their behavior. So there's adverse selection but no moral hazard, okay? Second example here. It's happening right now. My class has moved to online only this semester. My goal is to get people to study as much as possible. There will not be any adverse selection. The students that are in my class already signed up. They can't self-select. They can't choose to be in the class anymore. So there's no adverse selection. But I'm pretty sure there's moral hazard. Students probably study less when the material is online because they know they can use their notes, right? So they might feel obligated to study less. So I hope this is not the case, but I feel pretty confident that there is moral hazard in the sense that people will change their behavior. When you're in class, I can see if you're on your phone. I can see when you leave. But if you're watching the video, there's nothing I can do to really punish you if you stop watching it. There's nothing I can do to reward you if you're always coming to class, right? So a lot of those abilities break down when the class is moved to online. So as a result, I bet people study less. That's moral hazard. As a third scenario here, this is a policy that we have in place every semester, right? Students are allowed to drop classes without it impacting their GPA. They can drop for any reason very early on in the class, and then, about halfway through the class, they can drop with a W. Think about what that does, all right? Let's say I'm teaching a really hard class, money and banking. I teach money and banking. It's probably the hardest class I routinely teach. For money and banking, think about what this does. For a student who's kind of borderline, who thinks the class might be too hard, this incentivizes them to take the class because they know if they're doing bad, they can always drop. So I will get students deciding to take my class because they know they have this option that otherwise wouldn't take the class. So that's adverse selection. But I bet there will also be moral hazard. Students who are in this class will know that if they do poorly, they can always drop, right? So they're taking the first exam, they're studying, and they say, well, if it goes poorly, I'll just drop the class anyway, so I'm not going to study as much. That's moral hazard. People changing their behavior, right? Adverse selection is about who takes a class. Moral hazard is about how much they study as a result of the incentives that they face. So in this one, you'll get adverse selection and moral hazard. So be very careful when you're doing these examples for the quiz and the exam. And I hope to see you next semester.